Hey everybody, welcome to Get to Know Your Wedding Pro. My name is Reed with Best Made Videos. We are a wedding videography company based out of West Seattle, Washington. And I am joined today by my friend Juliet Horton of Everly. And Juliet and I met, I won't say which wedding show, but we met at a wedding show that was probably didn't have the attendance that anybody was hoping. And we were booths next to each other, and we sat for 2 days kind of getting to know each other and catching up while we were not talking to couples. So it's good to see you again. Thank you so much for coming in. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you do?
Good to see you, and thank you so much for having me. As Reed mentioned, my name is Juliet Horton, and I am the founder of Everly. And I've been in the wedding business here in Seattle for the last few years, but launched Everly in its current state in January of this year. And it's really a new approach to wedding planning, really intended to be kind of a mid-tier solution in between the full-service wedding planner and the full-on DIY approach. Wedding planners are fantastic. I know many of them here in Seattle. Many of them are good friends. And a lot of people just can't afford what they do. And then at the other extreme, you have the DIY approach, which if you have the time and energy and enthusiasm to throw yourself into wedding planning, that can be great too. But there seems to be a lot of couples somewhere in the middle there who could use some professional support, but don't have thousands of dollars to play around with, or don't have every weekend to become a wedding planning expert. So that's really where we come in. We work with couples all throughout the planning process, provide a lot of that same personalized support, but under that $1,000 price point that can be a lot more approachable for many couples out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. When Dorothy and I got engaged, like that was the first thing that, I wanted to get was some sort of, planning. And it was a tough sell even like to my wife, well, now wife, but as a, wedding vendor myself. I'm like, no, we need this. And she's like, well, but it's so much money for this. And what do we do? And so, talk about like just your own philosophy, like the importance of having that, professional expert to kind of help guide couples through.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do is what so many of us do in other areas of our lives. Like if you're an Amazon Prime member and you get your groceries delivered, it's like we all sort of know what we're good at and where we can add value. And then how can we efficiently bring in experts to do other things that make our lives easier? And that's really what we're doing. And that's what wedding planners do in general. But like I said, it's not really approachable or a real option for many people. So that's really our philosophy there, to say we do this day in and day out, the sort of things that you absolutely could do yourself and you could figure out yourself, but they'll just take you many hours. And that's what becomes, when you come home after work or on free weekends, you absolutely can plan your own wedding. I'm not going to say we're the only service out there that will get you down the aisle, but it's really the opportunity to speed up the process, spend the time that you do on wedding planning doing the things that you really want to do, whether that's trying on dresses or tasting cakes or seeing some of your most exciting venues that you're looking forward to visiting, and then coming to us as a trusted resource for things like budget questions, or I've called a bunch of photographers and I don't know what things cost. I just need some quick answers. We can really speed up the process. So that's a lot of the value that we add.
Yeah, it's, like when we were just talking, when we bought this house back, there was another house down the road that was like a way more fixer-upper. And my realtor was like, if you buy that house, this is your thing every weekend for the next, 3 years. And it's the same with wedding planning.
And it could be.
Yeah.
And you could do it, and you could save a ton of money, and you could do it yourself, and you could customize it to the way you want it to be. But are you really going to do that for the next 3 years with your home renovation? Maybe not.
Yeah, and it's it's the same with weddings, where like you said, so then you kind of alleviate the trouble spots, and then if somebody really wants to focus on the florals, or they want to figure out their ceremony and a bunch of readings and stuff, that they can focus on kind of fine tuning those things, right? So where did this idea come about? Because I think it's great. We've connected for a long time now about this. So talk to me kind of about how this all came about.
Yeah, I got this idea actually while I was in business school. And this always sounds kind of funny talking about it, but because it sounds a little like junior high class elections. But we had a student board, and I was social chair, and it was the best job I ever had until this job. And I ran a large social event every weekend along with a team, a few of my classmates. And those included one big formal event every term. And I used to jokingly call them my practice weddings, because it was a couple hundred people and an open bar and a band and a sit-down dinner, and some of them including hotel blocks and weekend getaways. And that was really my first foray into this world, and saw how unbelievably inefficient it was, where I would have to find venues or caterers and would pick up the phone and start calling because you couldn't find any information online. And I'd call some of the hotels and they would say, oh, thanks for your interest. You have to talk to Sherry, our events manager. It's like, okay, well, can I talk to Sherry? Well, she's on vacation and she won't be back for another week. And saying, well, I haven't done this before. Can you just tell me quickly if this is a $5,000 thing or a $50,000 thing? Because I really don't know. And no one could give you that information. And that's really what we're trying to bring, this sort of technology bent to it, the efficiency, the ease of use and upfront information that all of us have become very accustomed to in the rest of our lives. Like when we book a plane ticket or a hotel, having that information at your fingertips that the wedding industry just hasn't evolved into yet.
And I guess before we go too much further, we should really clarify kind of, so what you guys are, you're an online portal that people use.
That's right. Yeah, we're an online planning service. And so it's still very personalized because I don't think we'll ever get to a point with technology where people just want to push a button and have their wedding pop up. It's still a personalized experience where people have a lot of input there. But we're making it much more efficient, again, where you can spend your time on those things that you are excited about and not just the things that have to get done. So couples get started with our online profile and they answer a series of questions really about their style, their budget, their priorities. It's not the like pie in the sky, find your wedding style quiz of like, tell us your dream vision, because I don't think as many people know the answer to that as the wedding industry seems to think that they do. I talk to a lot of women, in their early 30s, have demanding jobs, and they're really put off, I think, by a lot of the wedding industry staying in the like, this is the most important thing that will ever happen to you. Tell me your dream. And there's a lot of women who are saying, I'm excited to get married, but this is not the most important thing that I will ever do. So we stay away from that. We don't have a Pinterest board upload or paint us a picture of your dream wedding. It's much more of, who are you and what do you guys do on the weekends and how much time do you have to spend planning? What are you most excited about? What are you willing to scale back on if needed? And then we're able to take that information and come back to couples with their budget, their very curated, personalized vendor recommendations, and a monthly planning checklist of what they need to do when. And that's different than those sort of free templates out there because a lot of those things on there don't apply to you. Or maybe they're not in your budget and you really shouldn't even have to waste brain space considering those things. So that's what we do right up front. And then couples work with us throughout the process to really as much as they need us. So they can schedule video phone calls with us or call, email, chat, or text unlimited times throughout the process. And then, prior to the wedding, we're pulling all those details together.
Yeah, I think it's great. And I think it's awesome where, people then are able to kind of plan on their, their time, right? And when they have it, like, I even know, like, if I'm trying to schedule client stuff with like planners or whatever, and they'll be like, well, we can meet from like 11 to 1 on Tuesday or after 7 on Friday or something. And I'm like, even I can't do that. Right. And let alone like the couple where having this service, I think is awesome because it really does allow that flexibility that I think like most people want nowadays. I just had a bride contact. It was like 11:15 night before last, and she's like, hey, like this is when I'm free. I need to talk now. Yeah. Yeah, you're totally right. And I think we as an industry need to be more understanding of that because for a lot of us, we think, well, this is our full-time job. And so I want to talk to you during work hours so that I can go have my personal life. Well, everyone else has a full-time job and wedding planning is happening during their personal life. And so with those video phone calls that couples schedule with us, we offer 7 a.m. slots. We offer 8 p.m. slots, that unlimited communication. You can text us on a Saturday morning when you're in the depths of wedding planning, when that's when you have a couple hours to make some progress on that and you're getting stuck on a few things, you can fire off a few text messages and we'll respond. Yeah, because I do know that like if I'm talking with couples, like, it might be 7 o'clock at night or whatever, and like we'll ping back and forth 5 times and then I won't hear from them for another 2 days because like that was the time. That was the time that they had to do wedding planning and then they have to get back to their jobs and the rest of their life. And yeah, we notice that too. There'll always be a flurry of activity and then we won't hear from people for a few weeks and then they'll pop up again and be like, okay, so you have a little bit more time in your schedule or some calendar time blocked off today. Awesome. So, you kind of, you were planning events in business school. Talk about kind of your background, because I had pulled up the site and I was looking and, you seem very knowledgeable and a lot of, business background and stuff. So talk about kind of like your background, schooling, and kind of how you became who you are. Yeah, my background's in finance originally. So I studied business undergrad, spent a few years in the banking industry out of undergrad, and then
went to business school at Dartmouth and came out to Seattle originally for a finance job with Amazon. So not exactly a ton of overlap there, but spent a few years at Amazon and sort of had this idea in the back of my mind for some time, and got into the wedding industry originally, as many people do, as kind of a side business of nights and weekends while working full time, and started out as a traditional wedding planner, really to learn the ropes, meet vendors, work with couples throughout the process, and really understand what about this industry was working for couples, what wasn't, and where people could potentially need support. So I started a day of coordination business originally and worked with about 30 couples prior to launching this business in its current form.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, the backgrounds that people have and kind of in their previous lives before they, and what you learn and kind of what gets added on to you as you go. And so obviously like Amazon and finance and, specific things and planning and, efficiency, what kinds of skills did you learn that you are now bringing to Everly?
I think I can build people a pretty mean Excel budget. So that's probably the easiest answer there, to say that's the part that I don't think anyone likes about planning their wedding. And we can do that first and foremost when we go through their profile. And that's actually where we always start to say, okay, let's kind of orient ourselves here of what are we working with? We need to understand this before we kind of hand select vendors. But that's probably the part that I totally geek out on. And we try to make it so that you can't really even figure out how complicated it is in the background, so that you're seeing kind of the front tabs that make sense and clearly lay everything out, with a bunch of hidden tabs with formulas that hopefully no one ever finds, because that's the scary part that no one ever needs to see, how the sausage is made.
Was it tough kind of putting all that together and figuring all that out? I mean, or did it just kind of come naturally to you that?
No, I mean, it took some time, certainly. And that's where that kind of initial expertise in the wedding industry certainly helped to say, what are these reasonable expectations? One of the things that sort of pushed me over the edge in wanting to start this business was I was going through one of the many directory sites out there. And, for the wedding pros out there, we all know that they make their money off paid advertising, but they create all this sort of fluff content to drive people to their paid advertising. And a lot of that fluff content is download your free budget template here. But the problem is, obviously, it's free. I mean, you have some sense that they're doing this in their own best interest. But the problem is they just sort of assume everyone is the same. And I had a time where I was kind of breaking down one of those budget templates and thinking, okay, how do they do this? What categories are most important? And I was playing around with it, and I typed in a $20,000 wedding budget, and it broke it down a certain way. And then I said, okay, well, just for fun, I'm going to type in a $100,000 budget and see how they break it down. And it was just everything in the $25,000 budget multiplied by 4. I was like, I got to start this business. This is absolutely absurd. It was the $25,000 budget. You have $50 for the flower girls' flower petals, right? Well, in the $100,000 one, you have $200. That's a fixed cost. That is not something that needs to be adjusted based on your guest count or based on your budget. And so it was seeing things like that in the industry that really kind of riled me up and pushed me over the edge and wanting to create something better. But to answer your original question, I would say it's probably that finance background that gets me excited about those things.
Yeah, it's funny because when we were planning our wedding, we signed up for the Knot to because we needed a web website so people could register or whatever. And they had all these timelines and things, and they're like, oh, 4 months out you need it, and I'm like, we didn't.
I know, and it's not relevant. It's a perfectly fine jumping off point. I mean, if you got engaged last week, it's a perfectly fine place to sort of orient yourself. But one example on that really reminds me that we're bringing value to couples is we had a couple that we were working with just recently, and they had this beautiful outdoor brunch garden party wedding. And the bride texted us a few weeks before the wedding, and she said, I'm looking through the checklist on the Knot, and they asked, they have these things on there about custom lighting schemes. So we go back to her and say a couple things here. One, don't look at the Knot's generic checklist, because this is giving you a panic attack a few weeks before your wedding. But let's talk this through. So custom lighting, you have a brunch wedding. It will be light out. There is no custom lighting scheme here. And that's the thing that we don't even want you to see if it doesn't apply to you, because it just gives everyone this sort of FOMO anxiety. And that's what we try to talk couples out of, to say, if you're really excited about having a photo booth, let's make space in your budget for that, and we will make it happen. But we're not going to put it on there if you're saying, well, my last friends who got married had one. Is that something I'm supposed to have? Instead of sort of divvying up the budget into a bunch of little things that you're going to do kind of halfway, let's talk about what's most important to you and go all in on a couple of things. But those generic templates, I think, give everyone this they leave you with the gimmies. They make you think that you have to have absolutely everything, and they're not really calibrating that to people's expectations.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good point, that people either look at their friends and say, well, what did they have? I need to have that. Or what did they not have? And I have to not have that. And I do that every day with video, where people have people that did, oh, my friend didn't do video, or oh, my friend did video. But really kind of customizing it for them and kind of their preferences and stuff, which I think even couples, when they start planning, don't realize what they really care about until it's time to kind of, you know what I mean?
And that's what we try to get people to stop and pause. And when they're completing that profile, answer those questions before they see anything. And I will tell you that most of the time we ask all couples to select their top 3 things. What are we going to go all in on? And what are the 3 things that you could be willing to scale back on if needed? And the secret is everyone will have to scale back on something. I mean, you could have $1 million budget, and at some point you will hit a breaking point to say, okay, we've hit our limit. We got to ratchet down the fireworks or something. But most people will come back with those surveys. And a lot of people, one of the things they're willing to cut back on is stationery. We sometimes have couples who want to go all in, and we love recommending the high-end boutiques where you can go in and touch and feel everything and work with someone to customize it. But for a lot of couples, they've gotten used to receiving save the dates over email, for example, or relatively just sort of straightforward, nicely designed, nice paper stock, but nothing crazy elaborate. And that's a perfect example to say, okay, then we're going to adjust the budget accordingly. We're going to recommend you to really high quality vendors, maybe like a Minted online that will be perfectly sufficient. It'll give you a good option, but we're not going to send you to a stationery store where you come out of there going, oh my God, I need double envelopes. I need an envelope liner. I need to hire a calligrapher. If that's what you want, we'll make money in the budget for that. But we don't want you to even know that those things exist if it's not a priority to you. Let's make those decisions first, and then you're never tempted to overspend.
Yeah, I actually think that's great. I think that's a really smart way to look at that. So talk about, so you were doing the wedding planning, you have this brewing. So how did that kind of transition work from, on-site planner to this online portal? Yeah,
there was a little bit of an overlap because with the wedding industry, there's such a long lead time. So as I mentioned, we launched in January of this year. But even this last summer, I still had another dozen or so weddings that I was seeing through the whole process. And those couples, their experience didn't change at all. We were still meeting in person and doing sort of the traditional model to get them over the finish line. But there was a little bit of overlap there, just given with how long things take to get going. Because when we launched, it was sort of busy engagement season. So some of the couples that we're hiring Everly in its current form are getting married this year, but most of them, especially the bookings we're getting now, are for next spring and summer, as similarly with you.
And so then what was kind of the reaction when you launched, and what kind of, did you feel like it was warmly accepted? I mean, what was that experience kind of like?
I think it depends entirely on who we ask. So there's a couple different camps. I think wedding vendors get this immediately. And they think it's a cool concept to say, when we recommend couples to you, they'll understand what your service costs. We'll make sure that we're only sending them to you because they can afford you. And so our intention there is to really be a good service for vendors, to give you high quality leads. We don't charge for anything like that. We do not monetize any side of the business other than the couples. So that allows us to stay very impartial and say, we're recommending people to you because you do great work, not for any other reason. So I think vendors get it immediately. With couples, it's very interesting. Married couples, whether it's friends of mine or friends of friends or our team members, they get it immediately and say, oh my God, I love this idea. Yes, I would have used it. Yes, I would have paid money for it. I wish this had existed when I got married. I will say that there's been a little bit of a challenge in convincing newly engaged couples. And what's really interesting with that is to see now that we're really taking off and seeing this volume of who's coming in the door, at what stage of planning do couples find this most valuable. And when we had launched, my initial hypothesis and hope was that when I saw you in January at all the big wedding shows, that people are going to get all our marketing material and run home and sign up for this and think, oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what we needed. And that didn't happen. A lot of those people popped up a few months later to say, okay, well, we went to the wedding show. This was great. We have some decisions to make. But a lot of the ethos and very early stages of planning from couples that we talk to is still, how hard could this possibly be? And I think you know the reputation in the industry. You have friends who've said, "Oh, it was stressful, it was overwhelming, it was time consuming." But I think all of us think that we're like a little better, faster, smarter than everybody else out there, and think, "Okay, well, we'll figure it out. We won't let it take that long. We won't overspend." And then you get a few months into the planning process and realize that, like I said, you absolutely can do this yourself, but it could easily pay for itself to outsource some expert help along the way. So to answer your question, I think it kind of depends on who you ask. And our customers, of course, who are newly engaged couples, most of them are signing up a few months into their engagement. We would love it if they were coming in the door, they get engaged and run home and sign up with us. But I think it usually takes them a few weeks or months to realize they could use some help.
Yeah, I do think a lot of different things in terms of wedding do come from like not or either like regret or like realization a few months down the line. Because I do think that we want to think that we are, like you said, the best at kind of everything or could kind of figure that out. And like, we constantly have to like tell our couples, for video, like, we've done this a lot, like you haven't, and that's fine. People, I think like, and especially like vendors, I think take it for granted, like what they know. And they assume that like couples know that. Like our couple on Saturday, like we're all set up for them like to go cut the cake. And like, they don't know what knife to use or what, and like obviously be like, oh, well, let's, use a knife and then you use the thing to dig the thing out. But like, they don't know that. And like, that's like 0.001% of the wedding, like how to stand to cut the cake, like let alone all these other things that like people assume the couples know or don't. And so, yeah, I think like whether it takes them like day one or a couple months in, like I do think it's important to like get people in and hopefully they can get on before it's too late and they realize, that they do need some help.
Yeah. And I think most of those couples and we can tell, they'll create a profile one week and they'll sign up 2 months later or so, because it is a big decision and it is a long process for a lot of couples. And so I think in many cases they're becoming aware of us, going out and seeing what else they can do on their own. And with any other service, I probably would do the same thing to say, good to know. I'm going to kind of keep that in my back pocket. That's there if we need it. I'm going to go give it a shot myself, see how far I can get. And then ultimately maybe come back to that pro when I realize how time consuming that process might be.
Yeah. So it sounds to me, because, when this, kind of came about and I think we had connected online or on Instagram or something. And then I met you and I was like, oh, like this is like, you're real and these are real people and this is a real service. And we were doing this like, it seems to me like with inquiries and stuff, like you run this like anybody would, like a wedding, like if I get emails from people and then like, you try to follow back and stuff, like you run it that way, like you did when you were a wedding planner, like were you approaching it that way?
We do, because I do think it's important that there's a face of the company and that people know that these are real people. When I had started kind of early stages of ideas of this business, I was kind of mapping out, okay, how far could we get with like what the startup world calls a minimum viable product? Like what can we get out there to just validate that this is going to work for couples? And what we do right now is when you complete that profile and you hit submit, we say, we'll be back in touch within 3 days with your budget, your checklist, and all your vendor recommendations. And I had come into this business initially thinking, if we could spend the money, we could automate all of that. You just click the button and everything pops up immediately. And what's been really interesting in going this path that's much more economical and kind of conservative is that the feedback that we've gotten from a lot of people is that they like that it's actually people building that. They don't mind waiting 3 days to say, we're a team of wedding planning experts who actually know these vendors. And we're going to say, okay, you're going to be a great fit you're really going to like Reed. You are going to be a great fit for this photographer. This venue is going to be perfect for your style. I do think longer term, as we scale to other markets, we'll try to bring some efficiencies to that. And certainly we want to value getting customers their information as fast as possible. But I think that's a big part of this because it's such an important event to people. It's such a personal experience. They do want to know that we are real people behind it. And, these are the trusted relationships that we have that we're sharing with them. So I think that's actually worked out sort of well that we didn't overbuild on the tech side too early.
So kind of, and back to school and everything. So like this knowledge that you have and going to business school and stuff, like what was your motivations for going to school, or what was your dream, or was it to work at finance and Amazon, or what was your initial kind of dream? I don't know.
My childhood dream was to work at a bank. So that I was able to do out of college. And really kind of ridiculous childhood dream. I don't think I ever wanted to be like a dolphin trainer or a firefighter or what are the other popular professions? Astronaut, things like that. Yeah. Big into Monopoly and had my long-term vision of working at a bank. So not a lot of overlap there. And like I said, did that out of college. But I did go to business school with the intention of kind of returning to that world. And then, as I think has become so popular in the last many years, got sort of more interested in the tech world and the speed with which things move there outside of more kind of traditional finance, which is a little bit more of like, come in, follow the rules, do what you're told, and you'll get promoted. And if you stick it out long enough, you'll be reasonably successful. And the tech world is a little bit more compelling and that you can take things apart and figure out how to make them better and things move a lot faster. And so that was sort of my foray into Amazon and that space. And then my kind of ongoing interest in the event planning space, along with the ethos, I think, of the tech world was what brought me here.
Was it scary to leave Amazon?
A little. And I think with any business, whether it's, you're planning to run it as a side business or a small business or a startup that you're planning to scale, I mean, there's always good and bad things about it. It's funny talking to friends who are still there of like, yeah, I miss the highly subsidized health insurance and regular paycheck and stock. And oh yeah, there's all sorts of great things about having a traditional job. But there's also all sorts of challenging things too, of sitting there and saying, well, if this was really my thing, this is how I would do it. And I think there's no substitute for how much interest and passion you can bring to something that you feel like you really have a stake in. And so I looked at that job and any other kind of similar roles and thinking, how far can I get in a job that my heart and soul isn't in?
What was it about weddings that kind of attracted you in the first place?
Yeah, I think this is a space that's so interesting. It's so important. It's so expensive and stressful. And I think it was sort of a twofold perspective. One, from the couple's perspective to say this is important, this is a high stakes situation for people. And then from the business side to say this is a massively underserved market. There's absolutely no reason that there should be the immediate reaction when you ask someone, how's wedding planning going? And it's an immediate sort of eye roll and, it's going okay. We found a photographer, but that took much longer than I thought. And I had no idea that everything costs this much money and that sort of a response. So it was sort of twofold, I think, from, thinking that we could help couples and also from a business opportunity to say, none of us are willing to put up with this sort of inefficiency in any other part of our lives. I liken it to booking like a hotel. Like if you had to spend one night in Chicago and you had to call Hilton and Marriott and they said, give us a call. Tell us, like, what do you want for your one night in Chicago? Tell us your vision. What's it going to be like? And you're like, I don't care. Like, I just need a hotel in Chicago for one night. And I need to know exactly what it costs. And I need to know it right now. And I just want to book it. And I think for some people, there's certain aspects of wedding planning where they do want to have that conversation. They want to talk about their vision. They really care about that sort of thing. And those are usually 2 or 3 important things. Everything else to them just needs to get done. And I don't think that the industry really appreciates that. Like I mentioned, we still have this sort of ethos as a larger industry of like, oh, you must have dreamed about this your entire life. You must be okay spending a year of your life planning this because it's the most important thing that will ever happen to you. And when we're talking to customers or in user testing or market research, everyone we're talking to is saying, please build something where we can move through this process faster, where I don't have to pick up the phone, where I have pricing transparency and can just book people quickly. So that's really what we're moving towards.
Yeah, it's funny, like, because even like with some of my couples, like some of them like really care about like their video and it's like really important, and then some people it's like, okay, like we've got that, like we're and like it's great, like it's all shapes and sizes, and you just need to be really aware of that some people like I send I remember we did a bar mitzvah video a couple years ago, and I had really thought like, oh, this is going to be like we're really going to like get into this market, and we sent them the video, and I was kind of nervous, like I didn't know if it was any good. I'd never done one, and never heard back. But their planner that had done everything kind of kept referring other couples to me, and so I finally reached out to her and I said, I'm so nervous. Do you know? Like, did they like? She was like, oh yeah, but like next thing, on to the next thing. Like that was that day. But meanwhile, I'm sitting here thinking like, well, this is the most important thing. Like you said, like
right. And you're probably sitting there thinking, oh my God, they must have hated it. Like, why didn't they call me and just say this is the best thing we've ever seen? And they probably really liked it. It obviously was well done. And it was sort of they checked the box and moved on. And I think everyone has those couple things that they care about and the couple things that they really don't. And it's interesting seeing people's profiles of what people choose to select as those top three and the bottom three. And there's certainly trends there, but everybody is different. And so we're always really interested to see what people select there. And I know what my opinion would be, but that's not relevant. And so we don't have to come into those conversations with that lens to say, oh, of course, this is the one thing that you're passionate about. It's like, we have couples who, even on a, kind of average budget, might spend $5,000 or $6,000 on florals, and they do big installations and it looks spectacular because that's what they chose to really double down on. And then we've had couples who we've asked about that on our check-in calls of like, have you booked a florist? They're like, we're not going to have a florist. There's no flowers. Like the bride's not going to have flowers. The bridesmaids aren't going to have flowers. We're just not doing flowers. I'm like, okay, fine. So anything works in that world. But it's just kind of being open to letting people make those decisions.
So you were talking about user experience and like market research, and like these are things that like I don't hear a lot when I'm talking to other wedding vendors. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit, or kind of like using your knowledge for
and I think that's just sort of a little bit of my background that I can bring to this business, and that's not a lot of things that come up in the wedding industry a lot. I think we've over-indexed as an industry on very talented, creative people who are very, very good at running their kind of passion area and what they're talented at. But I think that's a challenge for a lot of wedding vendors, because I think most people get into this business for a particular passion, to say, I love photography. But there's a lot of things about running a business that are not just getting to, as what percentage of time you're actually spent filming or editing, or what you really care about, and how much of it is just running a business that you have to run. And I think I'm sort of on the other extreme to say, I don't really have any marketable talents. I can't arrange flowers. I can't take photos, but I can run a business that's talking about those things.
Because I feel the same way, I've always said, like, I don't know if I'm like the most talented videographer in the world, but like, I know that I can give you like an A-class, experience, and like be really, do the best that we can, and give you a good customer service. And I do think like doing this podcast even, and like talking to different like vendors and like researching different companies and things, and like people run their businesses like very differently. And like you said, it is a lot more like this passion of like, oh, I want to be a florist versus like, oh, I want to run, a successful company. So it's a tough balance.
There's definitely a balance there. And I think as an industry, the one thing that we don't do particularly well for our customers is that sort of customer service side of, having couples have to wait on response times and things like that, or even just the transparency in pricing. I do think that the industry, for a number of reasons, has sort of operated apart from the way a lot of other industries operate. And I could talk forever on my hypotheses as to why that is. But for a number of reasons that the industry sort of gets away with things that I don't think customers tolerate in other industries. And unfortunately, I think that leads to a lot of frustration on the customer side to say, I'm not allowed to wait 3 days to respond to an email at work. Why is this my experience when I'm looking to hire someone? Like, I want to give you my money. Can you respond faster? Or can you be more upfront about pricing and things like that? And I know that's always kind of a pet peeve with vendors to say, I'm kind of turned off when people ask about pricing upfront. Obviously, this is an art and it's my passion and things. And I do think there's a big disconnect between, well, if that's what the customer wants, that's what you need to give them that transparency. You need to give them that information they need to make informed decisions, whether or not you think that that's kind of your ideal state. And I think we're seeing that with a lot of people moving towards DJs. I think have done the best job of this, of having like an online availability check to say, let's not even waste our time emailing back and forth and trying to set up a phone call if I am already booked for your wedding date. So I think we're moving in that direction in kind of fits and starts, but that's definitely what we're trying to bring to this, to bring a lot more of that efficiency and customer experience.
Yeah, there's nothing more frustrating for me than listening to the debate of people saying that, oh, we don't need to put pricing on our website. And I went to the Wedding MBA last year, and I sat for it was like hour and a half forum or whatever, where they debated putting the pricing on the site versus not. And you will never convince me that at least not having a range on your site. A starting range is worse. I think ideally, you would just have your packages. I just have our packages out there. Better is to put a range, and then worse is to just have a starting at, which I think is also terrifying for couples, because if you starting at $3,500, well, what does that mean? That could be, I get 1% of whatever you're selling, you will never convince me of that. And I do think it's like so interesting. Like you said, like you go on like Expedia, I need to book a hotel, and there's 10,000 different places, and this is the exact price for your date and this time and all these things. And then you go on like these wedding websites, vendors of any kind, and like there'll be no pricing at all, or like, oh, just email me for information, or like the best one I see is like, email us and we'll send you our pricing guide. Well, I don't want to do that, because then you're going to have my email and then you're going to follow up with me 10,000 times, and I might not even have been able to afford you in the first place.
Right. And that's something that I similarly don't understand. And I think it's perfectly fine for the industry to continue debating. And I know people feel very passionate about this in one way or another, but everyone we talk to in user testing or customer interviews says, please build something where I don't have to call someone. And so I do worry that might be an outdated way of thinking to say, and I think it comes from the place that a lot of vendors think, if I can get you on the phone, I can convince you because I know what I'm talking, and they do, they know what they're talking about. They run successful businesses, but so many consumers just aren't interested in even getting that far. So yes, we are a big proponent of pricing transparency and letting people kind of make informed decisions with that information at their fingertips. And I suspect that the industry will continue going in that direction. When I had started in the business as that day of coordination business that I had mentioned earlier, I had a function on there that it was one flat rate. It was like no questions asked. It had to be in the greater Seattle area, but assuming, okay, it's going to be a 14 or 16 hour day, that going in. And with a set radius, you have some expectation of how long of a day it will be, how long the drive will be. And then I had one flat rate, no questions asked, and an online booking system. And of the 30 or so couples that I worked with over that process, 4 booked me just sight unseen. They never emailed. We never had a phone call. I just got an email saying, okay, you're booked for August 4th. It's like, okay, great. And I think so many people are surprised by that, especially for something like a wedding planner, that it does seem like somebody you have to click with. But I think for the more established vendors, once you have tons of reviews to vouch for, you have some testimonials on your site, you have a large portfolio of your previous work. For those couples that's something that they want, but maybe it isn't the one thing they really care about. Like, we definitely want a good videographer. You have great testimonials. You have your pricing package. Let's go. This is one thing off my list.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I always tell couples it's up to them, however they want to plan, and I can do it. I got to drive to a meeting tonight. I had a phone call last night. Sometimes it's just email, but you'll never convince me that not having pricing is. And just one last thought on this, and then we'll continue. People thinking that but I get so many more inquiries when I don't have my pricing listed, but then it's like none of those pan out, if you just want to spend all day responding to emails.
Right. How many of them, if you're looking at like your website metrics, how many users bounce? Like, yes. How many people land on your site, don't quickly find a price and immediately move on? And my guess is a lot of people aren't measuring that number. And then the second thing is, how many inquiries are you, inquiries is not the metric that we're working towards. Saying I had 1,000 inquiries this year doesn't translate into any money. So I suspect people would be running a more efficient business if they were more transparent about that information.
So launching in January. So now you're kind of like, we've got through part of the, clients, kind of this first summer, and now moving in. Like, what has the experience been like so far? What are you learning? What are couples, enjoying? Talk about that.
Yeah, it's been a great experience so far. And we've gotten really positive feedback from the couples who have already had their wedding day. We have a number of them coming up this fall. So great to get input from them. And some of the ones we had this early spring and summer were user testing, beta testers and things that were able to give us kind of rapid feedback on a lot of that, so we can ensure that all our customers who were getting married this past summer, we had worked out all the kinks and everything throughout that process. So really positive feedback so far. Like I said, I think once couples land with us, they're very happy to have that ongoing support. It's the biggest challenge, I think, for us is just helping couples sort of understand what the roadmap looks like over the next couple of months, and how we can provide some support, and then what their other options are there. And sometimes we do get inquiries from people who we refer to full service wedding planners to say, you have the budget for this, you have the design needs and the complexity where this is really going to be money well spent, and we aren't the right service for you. Or we get inquiries from people, sometimes we'll get questions to say, what's the smallest budget you can work on? And we'll say anything. Like, we're not going to limit anyone who can sign up for us, but I also understand that our fee of $750 is a pretty big part of your budget if you're working under $10,000 or so. So we'll get inquiries from couples too who say they want to use our service, but just can't quite make it work in their budget. And, we offer a free 1-hour phone call when people sign up. Just through their profile. They don't have to pay or anything like that. And sometimes we hop on those calls and say, we'll give you an hour's worth of free wedding planning advice. And I think you should save your $750 so that you can buy a bunch of beer and wine at Costco. Like, this is not the area that you should be spending your money on. So we're not the right service for everyone. But I think for a lot of people somewhere in the middle there, we can be a really helpful provider throughout that process. And I've gotten a lot of good feedback from people who've gone through the process so far, and as well as those in the early stages of planning for next summer weddings.
Yeah, I think, being very self-aware of where, all vendor types, where you are in terms of I know what kind of product we provide versus, and like you said, you can refer up or down or say it's not the right fit. But I do think having that self-awareness in any business, but especially weddings where it is a very personal thing for, some clients, I think it's really important. So, when people get on the site, you have kind of a team, right, of people that help talk to them and talk about kind of how that structure works. And if I'm, if I'm on the site now and if I'm working, how does it work?
Yeah, that's right. So they would get started with our profile, and they can kind of poke around the site and learn about what we do and see previous weddings and go through photos of previous couples. And then that first really call to action would be creating that profile. And like I mentioned, that's the opportunity to say, what do you care about? What are you most excited about? What's your style? And then when they finish that profile, they have the opportunity to immediately sign up with us. And that's when we say, we'll get everything back to you custom built within 3 days, or they can schedule that free 1-hour phone call with us. And sometimes those phone calls are just questions about how exactly does your service work? What about this? What about this? And some of it is, can you give me real planning help? Do you know a good photographer in this price range? That sort of thing.
So then once they're signed up, talk about that, because I just want to make sure we kind of walk through the whole.
Yeah, so we immediately get to work and get back to them with all their personalized planning tools within those 3 days. And then they have the opportunity to start scheduling their video check-in calls with us. And so that's the time where we would open all those documents together, get on a video call and say, okay, let's go through this. What did you think of those venue recommendations? Or if they already have a venue, photographer, or caterer recommendations, and start going through the process, they can sort of update us on where things stand, and we can jump in with advice or questions, or have you thought about this? Have you talked to this person yet? Those sorts of things. So a lot of times we're problem solving a lot of things on those calls, and then we're sending out an email afterwards saying, here's the action items we have from that call. We have a few things that we need to follow up with you on. And then here are kind of our recommended next steps for where you should spend your planning time.
And so if I sign up on there and I get matched with whoever, then you kind of work with that person throughout. Is that how that works?
Yeah. So let's say for videography, if a couple had the budget for that, they wanted a videographer, we would recommend 2 or 3 videographers for them, because we know they still want to make that final decision. We're not going to say, here's your videographer. It's still a pretty personal decision. They want to make sure that they like their vendors. So we're really filtering the universe down from, if you Google Seattle videographers, from the thousands of hits you're going to get, down to here are the 2 or 3 that we know really well. We trust them. They do great work. We've worked with them before. They are in your budget. We've built your budget in such a way that you can afford this. Here are the ones that we recommend reaching out to. And then they're still having the conversation with you as another vendor, because if we can be involved, but sometimes it's too many cooks in the kitchen, and sometimes the 2 of you can sort of hash it out easier. But then we can be looped back into the process at any time. And then prior to the wedding, once they tell us that they've booked you, we're reaching out to you to say, here's the timeline, here's the floor plan, here's all the details that you need.
Yeah, I love those planner client conference phone calls. Don't like that. And so, but then in terms of you guys though, from Everly, so if I'm working with you, it's you that I see kind of throughout the check-ins? That's right. So we know that that's kind of a big thing for people. And so while we do have a team of wedding planning pros, we know that it's nice to be able to have a call with someone consistently throughout the process. And so once you're talking to somebody on those initial calls, that can be your go-to person throughout the process for those video calls. For things like text messages and chat messages, if it's something that someone can respond to really quickly to say, how much does this cost? Do I need this? We'll respond immediately based on kind of whoever is available. But for those sort of things like video calls, I think it's nice to be able to build up a rapport with someone, especially when you get into things of
remember that whole thing I explained about my parents? I don't want to have to get into this again, that sort of thing. It's nice to have some consistency.
Yeah, I think it's nice to have kind of a familiar face along the way. And so then I was reading on the site too. So like if somebody thought that they needed like an actual day of person, then you guys work, right? You have like preferred kind
That's
of people.
right. Yeah. So our process sort of ends a little bit before the wedding. It can be 2 days before if needed. We try to wrap everything up a few weeks beforehand so everyone feels comfortable and not stressed, but we can be as involved as we need to be up to the wedding day. And then some of our couples do choose to hire a day of coordinator and some don't. We don't require it as part of our package in the interest of keeping prices as low as possible because not everyone needs it. Or there's sort of 3 different approaches. Your venue may have a kind of baked in day of coordinator that you've already paid for, and we don't want you paying for that twice. Your budget might not allow for it, in which case we'll say, all right, you have to designate a friend or family member to be the go-to person. Vendors are going to have that person's phone number. Someone is going to be the point person. That's not you or your mom. Or they can hire what we call like our partner coordinators. And those are coordinators who are wedding planners in the greater Pacific Northwest wedding market. And they're running their own independent businesses the same way a photographer is running an independent business. But we do have partnerships with them that basically means we've had the conversation to say, look, we're going to do all the prep work. You don't have to do the timelines, the floor plans, confirm any of the details. If all that's done and you get this packet 3 weeks ahead of time and you show up and just follow the directions, would you be willing to give our couples a discount? And so the coordinators that we refer give about 50% off to Everly couples to say they know that by the time they show up, everything is going to be thought through. It's going to be an easy day, and they're willing to give pretty big discounts there. So that's how we solve for that day of. It kind of depends on what the couple needs, what their budget can accommodate, and sort of the complexity of the day on what we would recommend.
Perfect. And so then in terms of, you guys started in Seattle, like you said, I think you had set off, Mike, at the beginning that you're expanding now kind of to the San Juans and out, to Washington. So talk about kind of that future vision and where you kind of see this going in the next 5 years.
Yeah, we are in the kind of larger Pacific Northwest market. And honestly, we've expanded just sort of opportunistically originally based on couples' desires to look at other markets. So we have a number of couples next summer who are getting married in the San Juan Islands in Victoria, a few hours east of Seattle. And so our future plans are really a market by market rollout because there's so many vendors that are very local. We do partner with national brands when we can to do anything online. Like I mentioned, Minted earlier, we have a partnership with them where our couples get 25% off, and that can be a really good option. And so when we go to a different city, that's still relevant. But so many vendors are local, from caterers to photographers, anything like that. And so we'll be looking to expand into kind of a city by city rollout.
Well, I think it's a great idea. I thought that it was a good idea when I first heard about it and when I met you back in January. I think especially nowadays with the way that I see, couples moving and clients and, just like the millennial or whatever you want to call it. But I do think it's a good idea. I think, it's a good even rollout, to other cities, I think is really smart. I wish I would have thought of it. But no, I really appreciate it. And I think it's good to kind of get your face behind, and a voice, and this is who we are, and these are real people, and we're going to kind of help you work through that. So I really appreciate you coming in today and taking part in the podcast. If people want to learn more about your company, your services, what you guys do, what would you have them check out?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And for anyone interested, I would encourage them to go on our site, fill out their profile, and they can schedule a phone call with us. And the website is everlywedding.co.
And you guys are also on social media?
Oh, yes. We spend a ton of time on Instagram, so come see us there too. Thank you.
And it's
at Everly Wedding.
Perfect. Well, this has been another episode of Get to Know Your Wedding Pro. Check back next week for another wedding vendor interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you.